What's up? I'm Troubleshoot. Welcome back to another video. In this quick guide, I'll be showing how to install Automatic 1111 Stable Diffusion from start to finish. I've already got an automatic one-line installer you can use to install everything, but this video is going to focus on a manual installation just to make sure everything works properly. The best results come from a clean install where everything's prepared properly. So let's begin. We'll be installing Automatic 1111 Stable Diffusion Web UI. This is the go-to web UI of choice for Stable Diffusion, but other ones do exist, such as SD Next. Anyways, there's a few things that we'll need in order to get this running properly. Number one, make sure your graphics drivers are up to date. Download it from the NVIDIA, AMD, or Intel website and update to the latest version. Don't just trust Windows Update to update your graphics card driver, as it may not get you the latest version. Then, in the description down below, you'll find a link to download Python 3.10.6. This is the latest version at the time of creating this that's supported by Automatic 11. We'll scroll down here until you see Files at the very bottom, and we'll select Windows Installer 64-bit. Click this, then Save, and open up the file when it's done. You'll find a link to this in the description down below. Make sure to tick Add 3.10 to Path over here, and then click Install. That tick box is incredibly important. We'll wait for it to finish, and when it's done, we can close this. Then the next step is to download and install Git. This allows us to keep Automatic 1111 up to date. In the description down below, you'll find a link to Git. Simply head across here, then click 64-bit Git for Windows Setup, save it, and open it once more. This installer's got quite a few steps to it, but essentially the gist of it is that you'll just click Next multiple times until it's done. You don't really need to adjust anything, but you can if you so choose, such as changing the Git text editor to maybe Notepad++, but besides that, that's really it. Just click Next many times until it eventually installs. I've already got this installed, so I'll close out of it. Perfect. Now we can start by cloning the Git repository, which means we're essentially pulling the latest version of Stable Diffusion Web UI to our PC. I'll make a new folder on my desktop, for example, and I'll call it SD for Stable Diffusion. You can call this literally whatever you want. Then inside of here, click at the very top over here, select all the text, hit backspace, then type in CMD and hit enter. This will open up a new command prompt window inside of this folder here. You can also do this by copying the folder's path, typing in CD space, and inside of quotes, pasting it in, which should take us to this directory. If you see that you're on a different drive, simply type C:, or whatever the drive letter is. Anyways, when we're in the correct directory, all we need to do is paste in the git clone command here, hit enter, and it'll start to clone this folder. But if you wouldn't like it to go into a separate Stable Diffusion Web UI folder, simply paste in the command, space, and put a dot to download it straight into the base folder here. Then you'll see a bunch of folders populate here instead of going into a subdirectory. When it's done, you'll see a bunch of new files in here. If you don't put the dot after it, you'll see a Stable Diffusion Web UI subfolder that you'll open up, and you'll find all of these files here. Perfect. Now it's technically downloaded, but it's not yet installed. It's not a program that installs like other programs on your system. Instead, it runs with Python to download a bunch of dependencies or different packages to run. It's all code-based, and you can edit pretty much all of the code whenever you see fit if you're a nerd like that. But for now, all we need to do is run webui-user.bat. But before we do this, I'll right-click it and choose Edit. We can edit some of the launch commands for this to tell the program exactly what to do. In command line arguments, we can add arguments like auto launch, which will start up a web browser and navigate to the UI, and update check, which checks for an update each time Automatic 11 is launched. You can also add arguments like xformers for extra speed, but for now, I'll leave this out. We'll just keep in these two arguments, which you'll find down below. This will make sure it updates every time we launch it up, which could be good, but it could also be bad. Sometimes updates do break the program, so if you don't like instability, you can remove update check and it'll stay on whatever version you currently have. In order to update it in the future, head across to the Stable Diffusion folder where you have all of these different files, click at the very top and type in CMD, hit enter, then inside of here, type in git space pull. This will pull the latest version and update all of the different files, updating Automatic 1111. Perfect. Now let's get to installing this and launching it up. Scroll all the way down to the bottom and launch webui-user.bat. As you can see, first of all, it starts by cloning a Python exe and it'll start downloading everything. Everything's kept inside of a venv folder, which you can find scrolling up over here. This VM folder has all of the different Python packages, NVIDIA torch, etc., etc. Whenever there's issues with updating the program, you can always come back to your Stable Diffusion folder and delete the venv folder. This will cause it to re-download PyTorch and all these other dependencies, which could take a little bit and a few gigabytes of internet, but it's usually a great fix for any issue that you're having in Automatic 1111 that's unexplained, especially after updates. As long as your Python version is the correct version, things are good. If you find that the Python version is the incorrect version, you can download the correct version, which will be notified at the very top. Just make sure to close this window and delete the venv folder. Venv is usually the cause of all issues when things go wrong and errors start popping up. Deleting it essentially causes it to re-download everything that's not our models, extensions, etc. It's just the program files. Perfect. Now all you need to do is sit back and wait for a few gigs to download, and eventually the program itself should launch up automatically. Keep in mind that whatever graphics card you have, if any at all, will be picked automatically by the program and fired up. There's a ton of launch arguments that you can put in to customize how the program launches up, as well as what GPUs it uses, etc. But those I won't really go into here. Instead, in the description down below, you'll find a link to the command line arguments and variables where you can set tons of different options for the program. There's really thousands of them. Some of them have huge effects, some positive, some negative, but anyways, you'll find this down below. For the most part, the only ones you'll really be interested in is lowvram and medvram. Adding these to your launch arguments can help speed up creations on much lower powered GPUs. For example, if you have a 1060 or 1050 with only 4 to 6 gigabytes of VRAM, this may be something you need to add, say VRAM or even lowvram. You'll notice that you get out of VRAM errors in the console whenever you run out of VRAM, especially if there's other programs hogging all of your memory, such as games, videos, etc. It's a good idea to close everything that's not necessarily important to creating images when you're using Stable Diffusion, as that leaves most of your resources to allow the program to run at all, if not a lot faster. Anyways, for the most part, you likely won't need medvram or lowvram, but if you have a lower end system, medvram is one of the options you'll want to use. So once again, you'll edit the webui user.bat file here with any notepad or text editor and add --medvram as such. Just make sure there's a space between each of your arguments for them to be considered separate. Then, if you made that change, you'll need to save it and close the actual program itself. But whenever you see the program downloading and installing, do not close this window until it's done. Otherwise, it could corrupt things. But if you accidentally do, just delete the VN folder and relaunch it. Anyways, for now, I'll wait for it to finish. There we go. The program is now downloaded and set up. If you have that auto launch argument, you'll find that your browser opens up with the Stable Diffusion web UI. At this point, you can select the model over here and give it a prompt where we can type something in and it'll generate. For example, if I do photorealistic spaceman, for example, and generate, we'll get ourselves a 512 by 512 image, which we can customize down here. As you can see, there we go. Super simple. That's really the gist of it. That's text to image. We can adjust the width and height, how important our config is, which is the prompt up here. We can also put in a negative prompt. For example, white spacesuit. Should get rid of the white spacesuit and instead generate a photorealistic spaceman wearing something else. In this case, it made it black and white and did something very funky to it. Anyways, that's text to image. You can see Textual Inversion, Hypernetworks, and Lora. These are all different ways of modifying a checkpoint, in other words, a model with different flavors, artwork styles, certain people, etc., etc. For now, we'll skip over these as these are more advanced. Checkpoints are different models, and you can select them here on the Checkpoints tab. Otherwise, you can select them from the drop-down at the very top. The Image to Image tab is somewhat similar. We can adjust images using a Photoshop type painting, or of course, just change the image style entirely. I'll drag in a Windows XP background, for example. We'll leave pretty much everything as is, except for the prompt. I'll type in cartoon. If I hit generate, you'll see that it takes the image that we put in and thinks about it, then spits out something else that looks somewhat similar based on colors and general looky image. You can customize it further by choosing options down here, and denoising strength changes how much the image is noised and messed up and then recreated afterwards. If we head across to Inpaint instead, we can drag in the same image and this time write maybe person, then scroll down a little bit and paint in a person or where they would be. These icons are weirdly small. They're usually not this small, but anyways, we have an undo button, an erase button or a clear button, and a brush button that allows us to change the size of our brush. I'll make it a bit bigger here and we'll draw in a nice big stick figure person over here. Hopefully it'll clean them up a little bit. Anyways, we have person. We'll click generate. Now it'll take our image and stick in a person somewhere wherever it sees fit. It kind of worked around and put a person in the background, but anyways, you get the gist of it. Maybe a big circle would help better. Let's try generating again, and this time, well, it could have been better. Anyways, that's Inpainting. We can do batch images by selecting a directory and convert all of them into a different style, add things, etc. On the extras tab at the very top, we can put in a low quality image and upscale it over here using different upscalers. More of these can be downloaded, but that's a little bit advanced and often confusing. This is a good place to come to if you generate an image and it's rather low quality. What we can do is scroll down a little bit and click Send Image and Generation to the Image to Image tab over here. Sometimes it's text. On newer versions, it's a button like this. Clicking this sends it to the Image to Image tab, as well as the prompt, negative prompt, and puts the image here. We can customize it, etc. as we see fit. But instead, if we click the palette icon over here, it sends it to the Inpaint tab, where we can draw and inpaint on the image. Finally, the last button here, this ruler or scale, allows us to send it to the Extras tab, where we can upscale our image. For example, if I set it to 2 times and change the upscaler to one of the options here, these all give you different options of visibility, different styles, etc. We can set a second upscaler and use GFP GAN as well as CodeFormer to help improve faces and things like that. If I click generate, it'll upscale my image by 2 times, and we should have one of a much better quality on the output section here. So I'll open up this image, or rather the original image, in a new tab, and on the extras tab, I'll open up this one in a new tab. Looking between them, you can see the second image is obviously a lot larger, and there's tons of extra detail added, such as little pen markings and things like that, whereas on the first image, zooming in, it's just blurry and we don't see anything. Upscaling is seriously powerful. We can do this all in one step on the text to image tab if we instead choose high res fix over here and change the upscaler to whatever we want, then set the upscale by factor to just 2 or whatever number. This is a little bit more processor and graphics intensive than using the extras tab, and is done immediately after generating the image, so you don't know what kind of image you get unless you're using a set seed first. Anyways, it's generating a photorealistic spaceman, and shortly after, without outputting the image, it'll jump straight into upscaling it. And there we have it, it's complete. It took quite a bit longer than generating the image separately and using the extras tab to upscale it, but usually using the high res fix gives you a much more detailed, much better looking output than sending it to the extras tab and fixing it up later on. Why? Not entirely sure, but I think it's because there's a lot more generation details and data that isn't there if you separately upscale your image afterwards, either using the extras tab or using something like Topaz Gigapixel, which is another option that people use, a separate piece of software. Anyways, we can also batch process upscales using multiple images uploaded here, and finally batch upscale from a directory to another directory using whatever options we punch in here. On the PNG Info tab, we can drag and drop an image. For example, I'll save this one here by clicking the save button, then clicking this button here to open it up and save it. Otherwise, we can right-click save image as, and finally, just dragging it to a folder or a desktop is another option to save it very quickly from most browsers. If we go to the PNG Info tab and drag the image back in, you'll see that we get some information about what prompts, negative prompts, generation info, seed, etc. You'll also find Lora information and stuff like that if you generate an image you really like and save it using the normal method of using the save button, right-click save, dragging and dropping out, etc. You'll have all this information built into it. This also means that if you send this image to someone else directly, they'll be able to grab your prompt information and recreate it on their system, assuming they have the same model and model version, etc. Then on the checkpoint merger tab, we can merge different models. If you have more than just one, you can input up to 3 models here to combine the likeness, looks, etc. in different ways. We can combine A, B, C, take the config from just B or C, or don't take any config at all, bake in a VE to add extra quality and things like that, as well as change how these models are interpolated. Usually it's pretty equal, 50-50 or 33-33-33 to get all of the models merged together. Usually you'll take a certain style and a different style, stick them together, and some of the keywords between them will merge across, and you'll be able to generate images with the likeness of both of them. This is very advanced, however, and you'll only really play around with this when you find two models you really like and wish to join together. This is the tab you'll do them on. There are two different types of models, both Safetensors and Checkpoint. Checkpoint can contain malware and viruses, as it's a much more raw type of data. Safetensors is the newer, much more popular, much safer type that can only store data and doesn't execute anything when it runs. If you download a Checkpoint file with malware and even so much as load it, you'll be infected with whatever malware it has. If you download Safetensors, the odds of this happening are infinitely lower. Always download Safetensors. There are extensions to convert models from Checkpoint to Safetensors, but keep in mind the mere fact of opening a Checkpoint file can get you infected if it has malware in it. Even if you think converting it is safe, it's not. You're technically opening it to convert it, and you could get yourself infected. The safest way to convert files is to use either a third-party online platform, Google Colab, etc., etc. Then the Train tab at the very top allows us to create and fine-tune models. We can create embeddings, which we can feed in a few images to train maybe a face or likeness. Hypernetworks are the same, although more specifically for likeness rather than faces, people, etc. There are also Loras that you can train, but we can't train them in Automatic 11 without an extension. Preprocessed images allows us to tag and categorize them, and finally the Train tab allows us to train an entire model, but this is way advanced. The Settings tab, you can find everything about the program as well as how it works. There's different categories on the far side, and for the most part, you won't really be doing anything in here except for maybe dipping your toes into the Optimization tab and looking at what different things do here. But for the most part, this is pretty much out of most people's league, and there's nothing we need to do here anyways. On the Extensions tab, we can head across to the Install tab, where we can enable and disable things. Everything with the tick next to it is enabled, and if you choose to change the configuration of any of these, you'll need to click Apply and Restart here in order to save your changes and restart the program. On the Available tab, we can click Load From to load all of the official extensions here. There's tons of them. On the Install From URL tab, we can install third-party extensions that aren't yet listed on the Available tab on the main repository, though do keep in mind malware is a thing and could always be a thing when installing third-party extensions. Just make sure that they're safe first. Finally, backup and restore. We can save the config of everything, as well as all of our extension states, settings, export everything, and we can always import it later on. Pretty cool. Anyways, for the most part, you now know how to use Stable Diffusion Automatic 1111 Web UI, all the way from installing to basic image generation, image modification, extensions, and you've dipped your toes into a lot of other things. This video is a super simple crash course, and hopefully you learned a lot about the program as well as image generation. If your hardware isn't powerful enough to run this or it takes far too long, there are online websites that you can host your own versions of Stable Diffusion Web UI, as this is a website. Basically, you'll click install or open or whatever, depending on what platform you're using, and you'll be able to open up this same web page over here and use it the same way that you do on your PC, but adding models and things is going to be a little bit different. And for the most part, most of those services, if not all of them, will be paid to some degree. If you have your own hardware, especially capable hardware, which is usually a little bit more expensive, higher end graphics cards, for example, you'll be able to run this completely for free with no stress. You can run it CPU only, but it is going to take a lot longer, especially if you have older graphics cards, etc. Anyways, just a final note: to download models, Loras, Hypernetworks, embeddings, etc., we need to head across to different websites, for example, Civit AI, CIVIT AI, but do keep in mind that website has tons of NSFW models and extensions and things like that, so make sure the NSFW filter is enabled, which it should be by default if you don't want to see any of that stuff. There are other websites, but essentially when you download Safetensors, preferably and not Checkpoint files, we need to place them somewhere. In your Stable Diffusion folder, you'll find an embeddings folder. This is where you place textual inversion files. These are usually .pt files. Then, heading back into the extensions folder, you'll find third-party extensions here that you install from the extensions tab. Extensions built in come with the program and show you exactly how it's laid out. For example, Lora has different files inside of it, telling the programming exactly what to do with the Lora extension. Anyways, heading back into the models folder over here, we have different folders. we have Stable Diffusion, where you'll place checkpoints, for example, Stable Diffusion 1.5, but you can place different styles and things like that in here. For Hypernetworks, you'll place them in the Hypernetworks folder, Vase in the Vay folder, and for things like Loras in the Lora folder over here. That's really it. For the most part, you won't need to do anything else besides downloading a few models to add your flavor to your images, fire up the program once again, and everything should work fine. Quickly though, before we end off this tutorial, I'll edit the web UI user.bat with Notepad, and at the very end, we'll add space --xformers for a huge performance increase, about maybe 50%, which makes life a lot better on most systems. Do note that for some people, you won't be able to launch this up and things won't work happily afterwards, so if it fails to install xformers or xformers isn't happy on your system, simply remove xformers, as there are other ways to get a performance increase just by adding different arguments. There's tons of different ways, but for the most part, xformers is a good idea. Even if you're using medvram or lowvram, it should give you a huge performance increase. Anyways, that's really it. Hopefully you found this video useful. You now know how to install and use Stable Diffusion, as well as a super basic crash course taking you through everything you need to know. If you'd like guides on specific extensions, things like that, do let me know, and I'll probably get across to them at some stage. Anyways, thank you all for watching. My name's been Troubleshoot, and I'll see you all next time. Ciao.